The frosty air stung the skin, even under the bright winter sun. A golden retriever stood at the doorstep of a house, its fur glistening with frost and its paws trembling from the cold. Its sorrowful eyes stared at the door, as if pleading for salvation. Why had it come here? And what happened when the door finally opened? This moment melted the hearts of everyone who heard the story. Friends, what would you have done in this situation? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories of kindness and rescue. The winter air bit sharply, carrying a chill so fierce it seemed to seep through even the thickest layers of clothing. Snow blanketed the ground in a pristine white, undisturbed except for a trail of faint paw prints that led to a single doorstep. There, standing silently, was a golden retriever. His fur, once golden and warm like sunlight, was now frosted with a delicate layer of ice, each breath forming a small puff of mist in the cold air. He stood motionless, his body trembling as the biting wind wrapped around him. His paws, reddened from the freezing snow, shifted slightly, as though trying to find relief from the icy ground. Yet he didn't move away. His gaze remained fixed on the door in front of him, his dark, sorrowful eyes reflecting a quiet plea for help. The house was simple, adorned with a few decorations that hinted at the lingering warmth of the holiday season. The faint hum of life came from within voices, the clink of dishes, the muffled laughter of a family sharing their day. But outside, the retriever was alone, his only company the silence of the snow-covered street and the faint whistle of the wind. His presence was quiet but commanding, as though his very existence on that doorstep carried a story waiting to be told. He shifted again, lifting one paw slightly off the icy ground before setting it back down. His movements were slow, weighed down by exhaustion and cold. Yet there was a determination in his posture, a resolve that kept him standing despite the frost biting at his body. It was as if he knew this was his last chance, that behind this door lay the warmth and safety he so desperately needed. Occasionally, he let out a soft whimper, the sound barely audible over the wind. It wasn't a bark of desperation or a howl of fear, it was a quiet, gentle sound, almost like a question. Was someone inside? Would they see him? Would they help? His ears twitched at the faint sound of footsteps from within the house, and for a moment, hope flickered in his eyes. The retriever didn't know how long he had been standing there, nor did he seem to care. Time had lost its meaning, replaced only by the primal need to survive and the faint glimmer of hope that had drawn him to this doorstep. He had wandered through the snow, through the freezing streets, following some invisible pull that led him to this very spot. Perhaps it was instinct, or perhaps it was fate. As the moments stretched on, his eyes remained fixed on the door, his body growing weaker with each passing second. But still, he waited, his silent vigil a testament to his unwavering faith that someone would open the door. Someone would see him. Someone would save him. The golden retriever's eyes, dark and glistening, held a depth of emotion that words could never convey. They were fixed intently on the door in front of him, unblinking and full of quiet desperation. His gaze seemed to pierce through the wood, as if willing whoever was inside to feel the weight of his silent plea. There was no anger in those eyes, no panic, just an overwhelming sadness mixed with the faintest glimmer of hope. The frost that clung to his eyelashes only emphasized the vulnerability of his expression. Each time his breath misted in the icy air, it was as though he was exhaling his last reserves of strength, holding on to the fragile belief that someone would see him, that someone would care enough to help. The soft whimper that occasionally escaped his lips broke the silence of the snowy street, a sound so faint yet filled with so much emotion that it seemed to echo louder than a cry for help. Passers-by, bundled tightly against the winter chill, had already noticed him earlier, pausing briefly to glance in his direction. Some slowed their steps, drawn in by the unmistakable sorrow in his eyes, but most hurried along, dismissing him as just another stray. It wasn't that they were heartless, perhaps it was the weather, or the assumption that someone else would stop. Yet those who did meet his gaze felt a pang of something they couldn't quite explain, as if the retriever was not just asking for help, but telling a story. His eyes weren't simply pleading, they were asking to be understood. The world around him seemed indifferent to his plight. Snowflakes began to fall again, delicate and silent, landing gently on his fur. His coat, though thick, was no match for the biting wind that whipped through the empty street. He didn't flinch, didn't move, his entire being focused on that door. It wasn't just a door to him, it was a symbol of everything he needed. Behind it was warmth, safety, kindness, everything the cold, desolate world outside had denied him. The retriever lowered his head slightly, his gaze never wavering, but his posture shifting to show his exhaustion. He sat down carefully, as if even this small movement took great effort. His tail curled close to his body for warmth, and his ears flicked slightly as the faint sound of footsteps came from inside the house. Hope flickered in his eyes again, brightening for just a moment before fading into the quiet resignation that had taken hold of him. Who was this dog? Why had he chosen this door, this house? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, as he continued his vigil. His presence was almost otherworldly, as though he were more than just a lost dog, but a symbol of something greater, a reminder of how easily one can be overlooked in a world that often moves too fast to notice. The door remained closed, but the retriever's gaze stayed steady, unwavering in its silent message. It wasn't just a plea for help, it was a testament to his belief in the goodness of the people behind it. And somehow, his eyes seemed to say, I'll wait. I'll wait as long as it takes, The door creaked open, spilling a sliver of golden light onto the snow-covered porch. The retriever flinched slightly at the sound, his ears perking up as he shifted his gaze from the now open doorway to the figure that stood within. A man, bundled in a thick sweater and scarf, looked out, his face a mix of confusion and concern. The warm air from inside the house escaped in a burst, wrapping around the dog like an embrace, a stark contrast to the icy world he had endured for what felt like an eternity. The retriever didn't move at first, his body frozen, not from the cold, but from uncertainty. His deep, dark eyes locked onto the man's, scanning his face as if trying to determine whether he was safe, whether this was the moment he had been waiting for. The man took a cautious step forward, his boots crunching softly against the snow. "Hey there, buddy," he said gently, his voice filled with a mix of curiosity and sympathy. "What are you doing out here?" The dog tilted his head slightly, his body tense but his gaze softening as he let out a faint whimper. It was as though he understood the question but couldn't find a way to answer, his entire being communicating through his eyes, his posture, his quiet, desperate presence. The man crouched down, bringing himself closer to the dog's level, and extended a hand. "It's freezing out here. Let's get you inside, okay?" he murmured. The retriever hesitated, his body trembling not just from the cold but from a mixture of fear and hope. His instincts told him to run, to flee the unknown, but the warmth emanating from the open door and the kindness in the man's voice held him in place. After a moment of stillness, the retriever took a tentative step forward, his paw sinking slightly into the snow. The man didn't move, didn't rush him, simply kept his hand outstretched and his voice soft. "That's it. You're okay. Come on, let's get you warm." With each cautious step, the dog seemed to shed a layer of his fear, inching closer to the open doorway. When he finally crossed the threshold, the warmth hit him like a wave, melting the frost clinging to his fur and bringing a visible release to the tension in his body. The retriever let out a soft sigh, his muscles relaxing for the first time in hours as he stepped fully into the house. Inside, the air smelled of pine and cinnamon, a cozy scent that hinted at holiday cheer. A fireplace crackled in the corner, its glow illuminating the room in a soft, golden light. The man shut the door behind them, sealing out the cold, and turned back to the dog, who now stood in the entryway, his body still trembling slightly as he took in his new surroundings. "Where did you come from, huh?" the man asked quietly, crouching again to get a better look at the retriever. His fingers brushed gently over the dog's fur, feeling the icy patches and knots that spoke of days, maybe weeks, spent in the elements. The retriever didn't pull away, instead, he leaned slightly into the touch, his eyes closing for a brief moment as if savoring the kindness. The man noticed something then, something that added a layer of intrigue to the moment. Around the dog's neck was a collar, worn and frayed but still intact. It wasn't fancy, just a simple strip of leather with a tarnished buckle, but it was enough to suggest that this dog wasn't a stray. He had belonged to someone once. "You've got a story, don't you?" the man whispered, his fingers lightly brushing the collar. "Let's figure it out." The retriever settled onto the warm floor, his body finally still, his eyes watching the man with a trust that hadn't been there moments before. Whatever had brought him to this doorstep, whatever had driven him to wait in the freezing cold, he seemed to understand now that he was safe. The mystery of his past lingered, but for the first time, it felt like the answers might finally be within reach. The golden retriever stood hesitantly on the warm floor, his paws leaving faint wet prints as the frost and snow began to melt away. He glanced around the room, his dark eyes scanning every corner as if unsure whether this newfound safety was real or just a fleeting dream. The man moved slowly, careful not to startle him, and placed a soft, thick blanket near the fireplace. "Come here, boy," the man coaxed gently, kneeling to encourage the dog to relax. The retriever's legs trembled slightly, whether from the lingering cold or sheer exhaustion, but he took a cautious step forward, his ears twitching at the crackling of the fire. Each movement was deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if he was testing the very ground beneath him. Once near the blanket, the dog hesitated again, his gaze shifting between the warmth of the fire and the man's kind expression. Finally, he lowered himself onto the soft fabric, his body curling tightly as though trying to conserve every ounce of heat. The man smiled, his relief evident as he watched the dog settle in. "That's it. You're safe now," he murmured. The heat of the room began to do its work, thawing the ice that clung to the retriever's fur. Small beads of water formed and trickled down his sides, soaking into the blanket beneath him. His paws, reddened and raw from the icy ground outside, stretched out toward the fire as if drawn to its comforting glow. The tension in his body slowly began to dissolve, replaced by a visible sense of relief. The man disappeared briefly and returned with a bowl of warm water and a towel. Kneeling beside the dog, he dipped the towel into the water and gently began to clean away the dirt and frost that matted his coat. The retriever flinched at first, unused to the touch, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he watched the man with cautious curiosity, his eyes softening as trust began to bloom in the quiet space between them. "You've had a rough time out there, haven't you?" the man said softly, his voice soothing as he worked. The towel moved carefully over the retriever's legs, his back, and finally his face, wiping away the traces of his ordeal. With each stroke, the dog seemed to let go of another layer of fear, his breathing growing steadier, his body relaxing further into the blanket. As the moments passed, the retriever began to show small signs of gratitude, a gentle wag of his tail, a soft sigh as the man's hands moved over his fur. The warmth of the room, the care in the man's touch, and the safety of this new space worked together to restore a glimmer of life to the once trembling dog. He rested his head on the edge of the blanket, his eyes growing heavy as exhaustion finally overtook him. The man sat back, watching as the retriever drifted into a peaceful sleep. The firelight danced across the room, casting a golden glow that seemed to mirror the warmth and hope now filling the space. For the first time in what must have been days, the dog was no longer fighting to survive, he was safe, and he knew it. The journey to trust had begun, one careful step at a time. The golden retriever's soft breathing filled the quiet room as he lay curled up on the blanket by the fire, finally at peace. The man watched him closely, his curiosity growing. Who was this dog? How had he ended up alone, shivering on a doorstep in the freezing cold? The collar around his neck was worn and frayed, a subtle clue that hinted at a life he once had but had clearly lost. After letting the retriever rest, the man carefully examined the collar. Though aged and scratched, it bore a small metal tag. He turned it over in his hands, hoping for some information. The faint etching of a name, Buddy, and a partially worn-out phone number were barely visible. Buddy. The name seemed to fit him perfectly, as though it carried the warmth and companionship the dog so clearly embodied. The man's heart sank when he saw that part of the phone number had faded with time. Still, it was a lead. Determined to uncover Buddy's story, he jotted down the visible digits and began making calls, hoping that someone might recognize the dog or know where he came from. One after another, the calls led to dead ends, leaving the mystery unresolved. But the retriever himself began to provide answers in his own quiet way. As the days passed, Buddy grew more comfortable, his personality emerging like a flower blooming after a harsh winter. He was gentle and affectionate, following the man from room to room, always staying close as if afraid to lose sight of him. At times, though, Buddy would pause by the window, his gaze fixed on the snow-covered streets outside. It was as if he were searching for something or someone. One evening, as the man took Buddy for a walk to stretch his legs, the retriever suddenly froze in his tracks. His ears perked up, his nose sniffing the icy air with urgency. Then, with a burst of energy, Buddy began pulling the man toward a nearby street, his tail wagging with an excitement that hadn't been there before. Curious, the man allowed Buddy to lead him, following as the dog navigated the winding streets with surprising confidence. They arrived at a small, rundown house at the edge of the neighborhood. The yard was empty, the windows dark. Buddy sat down at the gate, his eyes fixed on the house with an intensity that sent a pang through the man's chest. This place clearly held significance for the retriever, but there were no signs of life, no footprints in the snow, no lights inside. It was as though the house, like Buddy, had been abandoned. The man asked around the neighborhood, speaking to locals who had lived there for years. He finally learned the truth: the house had belonged to an elderly man who had passed away several months earlier. The man had owned a dog, they said, a golden retriever named Buddy, who had been his loyal companion for years. After the owner's death, no one knew what had happened to the dog. Some assumed he'd been taken in by a shelter, while others believed he had simply wandered away, lost and heartbroken. The story hit the man hard. Buddy had been searching for his home, for the person who had once been his whole world. But when he couldn't find it, he had been left to survive on his own, braving the elements in a desperate attempt to feel close to the life he had lost. The thought of Buddy wandering the icy streets, cold and alone, brought tears to the man's eyes. Returning home that evening, the man looked at Buddy, who now lay contentedly by the fire. "You've been through so much," he murmured, stroking the retriever's head. "But you're not alone anymore. This is your home now." Buddy's eyes met his, filled with a quiet gratitude that needed no words. The retriever's journey had been long and filled with heartbreak, but at last, he had found a new family, one that understood the depth of his loyalty and the love he had carried with him all along. Buddy's life transformed in ways he could have never imagined. From the moment he stepped into the warm, inviting home, he became more than just a rescued dog, he became part of the family. Each day was a fresh start, a chance to rebuild trust and discover the simple joys that had once been lost to him. The man who had found him quickly realized that Buddy wasn't just any dog, he was extraordinary. Despite all he had endured, Buddy's heart remained open, his spirit unbroken. He greeted each morning with a wagging tail, his enthusiasm contagious. It was as if he understood the second chance he had been given and was determined to make the most of it. At first, Buddy was hesitant. He would follow the man from room to room, always keeping him within sight. It was a silent testament to the fear of abandonment that lingered in his heart. But slowly, day by day, his trust grew. The once timid retriever began to explore his new home, his steps more confident, his tail wagging a little higher. The man's family fell in love with Buddy instantly. The children adored him, spending hours playing fetch in the snowy backyard. They laughed as he bounded through the drifts, his golden fur glowing in the winter sunlight. For Buddy, this was a kind of happiness he hadn't known in what felt like a lifetime. The love he gave to each member of the family was boundless, his way of saying thank you for saving him. One evening, as the family gathered around the fireplace, Buddy curled up at their feet, his head resting on the man's lap. The glow of the fire reflected in his soft eyes, and for the first time, he seemed truly at peace. "He's not just a dog," the man said quietly, stroking Buddy's fur. "He's a reminder of how much a little kindness can change a life." Buddy's presence in the home began to inspire more than just his family. Neighbors, hearing the story of how the man had taken him in, often stopped by to visit, bringing treats and toys for the resilient retriever. Many shared how Buddy's story had moved them, how it had reminded them of the importance of compassion, not just for animals but for anyone in need. The retriever also seemed to have a special gift for sensing when someone needed comfort. Whenever a family member was upset, Buddy would quietly sit beside them, resting his head on their knee or nuzzling their hand. His calm, steady presence became a source of reassurance, a reminder that no matter how hard life might seem, there was always room for hope and healing. Over time, Buddy became a fixture in the neighborhood. He was the dog everyone knew and loved, the one who had overcome so much and still radiated warmth and joy. People often remarked on how resilient he was, how he seemed to carry no bitterness or fear despite his difficult past. "Dogs like him remind us of what really matters," the man would say. "They teach us to keep going, no matter what." Buddy's second chance wasn't just about survival, it was about thriving, about showing the world that even in the face of hardship, there is always room for love, courage, and resilience. His story became a beacon of hope, a living testament to how one kind act could ripple outward, touching countless lives in ways no one could have foreseen. For Buddy, and for everyone who knew him, the future was no longer about what had been lost, it was about all the joy and love still waiting to be discovered. Buddy's story quickly became more than just a family's tale, it turned into a beacon of hope and a testament to the transformative power of kindness. Word of the golden retriever's rescue spread through the neighborhood, and soon, it reached far beyond. People shared the story of the dog who had stood frozen on a doorstep, waiting for salvation, and the man who had opened his home and heart without hesitation. Every detail of the tale touched those who heard it. The image of Buddy, shivering in the cold, with frost clinging to his golden fur, stayed in people's minds. It was a reminder of how easily someone or something can be overlooked in a world that often moves too quickly. But it was the decision to act, to see beyond the surface and offer help, that truly inspired everyone. Buddy became more than just a beloved pet, he became a symbol of resilience and gratitude. People who visited the family marveled at how the once trembling retriever now radiated warmth and happiness. He greeted everyone with a wagging tail and eyes full of life, a stark contrast to the desperate, frostbitten dog who had appeared at the doorstep. The story even inspired others to take action in their own lives. Shelters reported an increase in adoptions, with many families saying they were moved by Buddy's story. If one act of kindness could change a life so profoundly, one neighbor said, imagine what could happen if we all did the same. Buddy's tale also served as a lesson for the family who had taken him in. The man often reflected on how a single moment of compassion had brought so much joy into their lives. It's funny, he would say, we think we're rescuing them, but in the end, they rescue us too. His children grew up with Buddy as a constant reminder of how important it is to care for others, no matter how small or forgotten they might seem. As Buddy lay curled up by the fire, his fur glowing in the soft light, it was impossible not to feel a sense of wonder at how far he had come. He was no longer the lost, freezing dog who had pleaded for help. He was a part of the family, a cherished companion, and a living reminder that kindness truly has the power to change the world. If Buddy's story has touched your heart, let it serve as a call to action. There are so many out there, both people and animals, waiting for someone to notice them, to offer a helping hand or a kind word. Never underestimate the impact you can have with even the smallest gesture of compassion. And if this story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Together, let's continue to share stories of hope, bravery, and the incredible difference kindness can make.